morning. My name is Lauren, and this is the channel Grand Colombia. I think maybe the number one question I am asked, and I'm asked over and over and over again, is Colombia safe? And there's no good answer to that because it depends. Is the United States safe? You know, where are you talking about? Colombia, where I live, is perfectly safe, and many areas of Colombia are perfectly safe. But there's also some areas that you don't want to go. And I covered those in a coffee time a couple weeks ago. Why am I addressing this now, since I've talked about it so many times in the past? Well, it's simple. This is an election year. We've got congressional elections coming up, I think March, and you got a presidential election in May. And whenever you have an election coming up, there's issues. And first, I want to give you a little background. Now, I've spoken a number of times about the FARC. Everybody knows about the FARC. There was the peace agreement a few years back, and the FARC supposedly disbanded, and some did. Some turned in their weapons, and went home. But they don't call them the FARC anymore. They call them the FARC dissidents. And they're the same criminals, they're the same people, same players, same leaders that existed before. But they were diminished during that process. But the FARC is not the only group. There are actually two big players that were similar. And one founded in 1964, actually it was a meeting in Cuba, the Cuban communists, and a group from Colombia. And they formed a group that the initials are called ELN. It's National Liberation Army kind of thing. And they came back to Colombia and they began a war. Now, this was separate yet intertwined with the FARC. Now, the FARC, their mode of operation was basically go out to the countryside, take the populace that was poor, mostly farmers, not very well educated, and essentially enslave them, put them to work in their cocoa farms. That's what you see in, movies and things like that. The ELN had a different approach in different areas of the country, where the FARC primarily were kind of out of the way places down on the Ecuador border and in the Amazon. The ELN went to the border of Venezuela and Colombia and into Venezuela. They're kind of equal. They looked for members that were more middle class. And now they have a range of members, but it was more middle class. And with them, they don't really get involved directly with coca farming. What they do is they put tax on the coca farmers, so they support it. But instead of directly dealing with the transaction, you have to pay a tax to be in that business in their area. And that's where they make their money is all the kidnappings you hear. It's primarily the ELN. Some people think it's the FARC. Well, the FARC did do kidnapping, but ELN, that's a modus operandi. I mean, that's part of what they do. Extortion of businesses, kidnappings, think mafia. And that's what ELN. Mafia with M16s or AK-47s or whatever they can get their hands on. Now, they've been at war with Colombia forever. And they've had peace talks on and off over the years, but they were not part of that agreement with the FARC. They still exist. But when you had those waves of people coming from Venezuela, their ranks swell because you got people that are coming over. Some of them were criminals, and it was an opportunity for them to make money, to establish themselves. And so the ranks of the ELN has swelled. And they're still primarily on the border of Venezuela, near Cucuta and north of that. They've been kicking up a lot of fuss recently. They've been controlling local elections. They've been assassinating people. Now, the thing is, if you're not in those areas, you're not affected by it directly. I'm certainly not affected by it in any way. But with the elections coming up, this is a communist political organization with a little difference, and I'll mention that in a minute. But whenever the elections are on, they try to put pressure on, and they try to portray themselves as a victim of the government. When the government attacks them because they've been kidnapping, and the kidnappings that they do are mostly Colombians. If a Colombian doesn't pay his extortion money for his business, maybe they'll kidnap him or a family member, so they'll get money out of that, plus they send him back and he's more in line. And so that's just a tactic that they do. Though with the election coming up, they're going to stir the pot. They were active along with outside socialists, communists, call them whatever you want to call them, during the protests last year. And they had infiltrated and created issues. And the reason I'm bringing this up, being an election year, just being months away, we're going to begin to see more of this. And just a couple days ago in Cali, you had a bombing. There were 2 or 3 police killed. I think there were 14 or 15 injured. And it was a targeted bombing. And you say, well, in Cali, that's not along the Venezuelan border. No, but they have been active in Cali and near Cali, but they only become active when it's time to. So, for example, if you remember the protests last year, where did all the bad stuff happen? It was in Cali. It was spread across the country. They had hoped that it would set on fire, but it wasn't like what was being portrayed in the propaganda news that was going on, and most people have no intention of getting involved in that. They thought you get it started and people would join in. Well, it happened in Cali, but they were also a lot of outsiders in Cali, or ELN. A lot of Venezuelans get involved, not because they're from Venezuela, but because the situation I named earlier, they become members of that organization. They've joined the army. So because of this situation, you're going to see more of these kinds of actions. They will probably pop up in Bogota once in a while. You'll probably see maybe a few more incidents like this in Cali. Probably not Bucaramanga or Medellin. It's possible, probably not. It's not what they usually go after. And it's more to make a splash and to continue to portray themselves as a victim. Now, you say, well, how is that? I'm not going to go into that in this video, but essentially you can just say it's a matter of politics. It's doing something negative and then framing your opponent, which is the Colombian government, as the fault. And actually, if you step back and look at it, it's just so much nonsense. But like all propaganda, it can be convincing. And so their point is, as this election comes up, is to try to convince even more people. Every time this comes up, they convince a little bit more, One day they want to reach that tipping point where they have enough votes to carry the people that they want into office. Gotta hope that never happens, but that's what's going on. And so if you hear there was a bombing or something along those lines, understand the backdrop and, actually what's going on with it. They're a scourge, they're criminals, and they should be wiped from this country. But you have a lot of people that buy into, how they're victims, and the minute the government tries to act on it, all hell breaks loose, and it's, the government is accused of genocide, and it's like if they act, they hurt themselves. If they don't act, then the country is hurt. If you talk to people that are in these areas, they pray that someone would come in and rescue them because they're being preyed upon. But politics is a powerful thing. And so that's what's going on. So does that mean you make a trip to Armenia or Manizales or Podeda and you're going to run into problems? No, I'm not saying that at all. I think it'd be highly unlikely. But think of it as Antifa or Black Lives Matter last year. That was coming up on an election and all hell broke loose. And we're coming up on an election here, and I expect there will be protests that'll be promoted, they'll be infiltrated, and you'll probably see one or two ugly protests in certain areas of the country. But understand the Colombian people are not easily led into this. They can be convinced, but they're not a violent people. So I'm not the least bit worried, but I thought I should give some perspective, because these questions, if they haven't come up, they will come up. And so that's what I got for today. I'll see you soon.
Oh.